I'm sure we can all agree that none of us likes to be told what to do. But there is only so much we can do alone, and we've never been more eager to be showing support and leadership from our elected representatives. This is why we are here to demand a binding commitment from our leaders who, ironically, seem more comfortable in the shade on these issues when they should be feeling the heat and sweating it out like the rest of us. This is why we must support Zero Hour and the Climate and Ecology Bill, because it's essential, logical, impartial, and it's science-based. Enact it and we have much to gain, and literally everything to lose if we don't. Thank you.
It's great to be here this evening, and brilliant to see so many of you here as well. I think that does tell our MPs something, that your government is not delivering what your electorate would like on climate change. Because real action for climate and nature is not optional. In my role in Devon Environment Foundation, I'm really lucky to come across brilliant people at the grassroots that are doing so much, dedicating their life to protect and restore nature in Devon. They give me hope, and they are literally creating the world that we want to live in. But then the government makes decisions that wipes out all that progress. They should be saying no to all new oil and gas fields, but Instead, they bow to insatiable greed, jeopardising all our futures. Even those who profit will suffer alongside us, because money can't save us from climate and nature collapse. Real action for climate and nature is not optional.
Unfortunately, the government strategy, net zero strategy, only gives a 50% chance of getting there. Who says that? Not me. The government's official advisor is the Climate Change Committee of Scientists. They say the government strategy will give us a 50% chance of averting 1.5. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do and we must do better. I mean, let's just take a showing that. Who thinks we must do better than a 50% chance? I think that's pretty clear. I also have with me the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which is signed by this government, united to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 for sustainable development. The Leaders' Pledge for Nature. Let me again take a show of hands, if I may. Who believes politicians should keep their promises? But it's not a silly question, because in the Government's Environment Act, and there are lots of good things in it, let's not deny that, in the Government's Environment Act, there is not the pledge to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. There is a pledge to halt it, but not to reverse it.
This week, we've also seen, as well as temperatures rise, the government's net zero strategy was called unlawful by the High Court, and that's just not world leading. We know we do need more. The Climate and Ecology Bill can deliver on that. So it's a science-based plan, it's a science-backed plan to tackle the interwoven climate and nature crisis together. So really, the Climate and Ecology Bill is all about putting the health of people and nature first. And it would do this by things like thinking about food security. And I know that Anthony as well is a big fan of regenerative agriculture, so it would really help promote that. It would also bring food production home. It would help stave off the worst impacts of climate change. So I know in Kingsbridge we've had flooding, and we are really going to get more intense, more erratic weather, and that will affect farming.
Nature's in crisis, we know that. As I stand here in this sweltering hot garden this afternoon, listening to tales of temperature records tumbling right across the country and awful stories of raging wildfires in the continent, we know we have a serious problem. Now, recently, we've heard some encouraging high-level statements from our government, but these statements are not being reflected in building decisions, in decisions about future farming policy, in how we treat our rivers, and in industrial investment decisions. And that has got to change. So my question to you is, what more do we need to do to change high-level political statements into meaningful gain for nature on the ground? Thank you.
But what we do have across a number of bills is a series of targets, commitments, and obligations for the government to actually take into the environment incredibly seriously. Our new environmental land management scheme is absolutely incentivising farmers to rewild, to use regeneration, to produce food, to make sure they're looking after their land. If we want to do a good job in terms of restoring biodiversity, we work with the people who know it best. And I would say exactly the same for the fishermen. As for oil, I think we've got to be careful here. I think at the moment we are going through an energy crisis, and I think we have to respond accordingly. Because my inbox isn't filled necessarily with the day-to-day normal emails that I've had over the last 2 years, although it's pretty hard to say I've had a normal day in the last 2.5 years. But what it is becoming rapidly more filled with is people who are struggling with their electricity bills, who are struggling with the price of fuel to drive their cars. And there is a short-term mitigation to that as to whether or not we can use oil, and I think we have to. But we also have to encourage the renewable sources that are out there. That's why I'm a supporter of the local electricity bill. That's why I want to see more renewable energy used in local areas. That's why I want hydrogen to be developed at a quicker rate. But I speak to a number of you actually quite often, and I love engaging, even if I don't agree with your opinion and you don't agree with mine. But I do this on all of the bills so I can get a better understanding and ensure that the points that we're talking about there, about the policy statements being matched by legislation, well, it is happening, and it is happening in these bills already.
But there's also a huge elephant in the room here, which is that we're not including any of the emissions, so our entire carbon footprint that happens outside of UK soil. So we know... we really need to look these things in the eye, and as a country say, we have this impact, and we have this impact around the world. So we know many of the things that we consume are produced, transported and disposed of all around the world. And even if we were to perfectly conserve our island as the UK, if we're not tackling the way that we're breaking down ecosystems, key ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest, for example, then we'll be done for. So we need to take into account our carbon footprint and our entire ecological footprints, and that's what the bill would also do.
There's a general feeling that the government doesn't have our back. We actually, in the last decade, have seen almost no progress in any sector apart from power. So it's not true that we are leading the world. We've stalled. So my question to you, Anthony, is that following the Climate Change Committee's critical report last month saying that the UK is heading way off track from its targets, isn't it now time we tried something different and made a legally binding commitment to limit our emissions to our share of the global carbon budget and to restore nature on which we depend and show leadership to the world, genuine leadership? Thank you.
So I'm sorry you don't think you're being supported, because there are grants out there. There is this ambition to make sure we're putting in 600,000 air source heat pumps into houses across the country. I have to say it got off to a bloody awful start, if I'm allowed to say that. But there is a desire to go back on this and to make sure we can do more. And the government is open with different funds to help different community groups, especially in the environmental area, across the whole of the UK. And I think this is what we've been talking about. That was all lined out in the 10 points that the Prime Minister put forward a few years ago, and is now coming forward with the investment and the money that we need to do. In terms of your graph behind you, I don't deny the fact that the Climate Change Committee reports are damning. They are absolutely damning. We do have to take action. But the very point of that committee is to keep the government on track and to steer it in the right direction. That, select committees. Committees are not set up independently of government approval. So they are following this, and it is helpful to have those reports because it is a useful kick up the backside to make sure we can get back on track. So I take the point of what they've come out with in that report, and we ought to listen.
We've known about the warming thing since I've started 33 years ago, and the speed of progress is really slow. There's so many things that any governments, this government and others, could be doing, which they don't. And that's the reason these curves are flatlining. I mean, what strikes me as amazing is I can go out and get 0% finance on a four-wheel drive. I can't go and get 0% finance on a heat pump. I mean, there's still a massive investment in carbon-centric sort of thinking, and the money has to flow away from that. You know? And the government has a massive role to do that and start giving people a push and the people a help as well. It shouldn't be up to local groups to set up wind turbines. It shouldn't.
Yes, I mean, if halting and reversing was a statutory target, it would drive action. It would ensure that all government departments act to achieve that target. The Environment Act doesn't do that. I have it in front of me. It talks about halting. Neither does the planning bill, neither does the other agriculture bill. I've read them. They don't talk about halting and reversing biodiversity decline by 2030. So my question to you, Anthony, is simply this. Forget the CE bill. Do you support a target of halting and reversing biodiversity decline by 2030?
The Environmental Land Management Scheme, the lead part of how we support our farmers, does support and re-enhancing biodiversity across our farms and our land.
But what about having a statutory target?
So forgive me, I wouldn't understand right now what a statutory target would look like, how you would measure it, and what it would look like in 6 years' time or in 5 years' time. So no is the short answer, partly because I think you've got to be careful when you're legislating about putting in arbitrary targets.
It's definitely not an arbitrary target. So we've been working with scientists such as E.J. Milner-Goulant, who's from the University of Oxford, and actually we work with her specifically on this very target. So she knows what she's talking about.
What's the target?
And the idea is that by 2030 nature is visibly and measurably on the pathway to recovery. And if you would like, we can speak to her more. But that would be a really interesting conversation if you'd be up for it, actually.
I'm always happy to engage as a...
Yeah, and the point is that at the moment we have a target that's to halt. So, and how is that measured? Yeah. So, you know, these things can be done. And I think basically what we're saying in the room is we just want to feel that everything possible is being done. And there's just not the feeling that that's the case. And when we talk, for example, about elms, all of this can't be on the shoulder of farmers, we know that. Elms is a voluntary scheme and there's not a clear enough plan yet. And we also know that funding is being cut for the landscape recovery scheme. So again, when we're asking ourselves, are we doing everything possible? One other thing about retrofitting and about heat pumps, because you know, we want positive messaging and we know that we can live healthy lives where we're feeling fulfilled. And in Italy, they're actually covering the cost of 110% for retrofitting and heat pumps. It can be done.
And one of the things that I think would help the public mental health would be if they heard our government speaking regularly, often and meaningfully about what they intend to do about climate change. It's great that you were here tonight, Anthony, engaging in this conversation, but I think we need something more meaningful, more target-driven, more legislative from national government, from our government. The Committee on Climate Change, in their latest report, gave the government 9 out of 10 for rhetoric and ambition, and 4 out of 10 for pathways and actions in order to achieve those ambitions. So why don't we hear more, less about Partygate, less about leadership, less about sleaze, less about VIP names, and more about climate change and what we're going to do about it?
Thank you for your question. I do think the government talks about it, probably not enough. And I think one of the problems that we have is that we have a communication problem of talking about some of the successes that we have had. I think, I'm sorry, but I happen to think, and as other panellists agreed, I think COP was an extraordinary success. And I also noticed that the 9 out of 10 on communication and 4 out of 10 on progress, that 4 out of 10 is higher than their previous report, so it is moving in the right direction. Too slowly. I accept that. I absolutely do accept it. But the point of those committee reports, as I said before, is to make sure we're taking the right action.
And also at COP26, we did see the president of COP26 break down in tears, so I would ask why.
I've had so many children, 14-year-olds, who do not want to have children because of the situation the world is in. I've had 14-year-olds say to me that their future is living on a dead red rock. Firstly, I want to ask how frightened you are as a person, because it doesn't seem to me that you're that frightened. because I think there would be more action. How you're going to give children hope so they don't feel a complete sense of inertia. And again, how frightened are you? Like really, as a person?
I'm concerned, but I also think what we have is the power. And I go back to what you said. I do think we have the power. And I think we have to be very careful about how we have this conversation with children. I think sensationalising the worst aspects of it terrify children. And I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be having honest conversations, absolutely. And that does mean recognising some of the positives in it. And it also means recognising some of the negatives.
I'm not frightened. I'm nearly 80. I'm not frightened for me. I'm frightened my son who's 27 and my grandchildren who are much younger. I think Anthony is actually one of the best MPs on this, but he won't commit to a statutory target to achieve restraining it from 1.5, and that frightens me.
I hope that we have more events like this. There's clearly a very strong feeling in the room. We need to speak